So I'm going to switch to English again, because my presentation is in English. It's hot, we didn't have coffee, and it's going to be a lot of boring legal stuff. But I'm going to try to make it cheerful and interesting. Because actually, if you do work in construction with a BIM process, you really need to know that. And there are also a couple of myths, such as public procurement regulations stop us from using BIM that we need to break. And we can only do that by looking attentively to the directive and to the legislation. Okay. Good. And now, can I just move it from here, or? Yeah, I can. That's great. Am o microfonie pe care nu o aveam. Nu știu de ce. Da, și mi închis. Acum Merci. So I'm going to speak about BIM and legal issues, and I'm going to speak a little bit more about the ISO series and what they entail at a contractual and at a legal level. We've mentioned the new ISO series a lot throughout the day, but we didn't really pay attention to what that means. In my opinion, it really brought a shift of perspective entirely, and it puts collaboration at the heart of a BIM-led process. Then I'm also going to refer a little bit to contractual tools that can enhance the use of BIM. We've spoken a lot about collaboration. Eugen, you mentioned collaboration, but you mentioned it rather in a more social context than a contractual context. Jan also mentioned collaboration as both one of the challenges as well as one of the positive results of digitalization and of the use of BIM. And if we do want to have collaboration in a construction project, then you can't rely only on people. You also need to have the proper procurement strategies and contractual techniques. And I'm also going to refer a little bit to all the legal implications of leading a BIM process in a construction project. You have legal implications before signing the contract, after signing the contract, and really, really important things that you want to pay attention to. You might think that the contract is not so important, so it's just something that you put in a box and then take it out of the drawer whenever you have a problem. But it's not actually. The contract is a living organism, a living body, and you want to work with it and regulate things properly from the very beginning. So that's the agenda. As I said, towards the end of my presentation, I will refer a little bit to collaborative contractual techniques, a type of contracts that are called alliancing contracts or partnering contracts. They're used a lot in the Anglo-Saxon world. I work with them a lot in my double life as a researcher in King's College. And at the moment we're doing some really groundbreaking work. We're working on a multi-party collaborative BIM protocol, which is ISO 19650 compliant, and which we believe delivers the results that no bilateral protocol could deliver in a BIM-led process. So Georgiana, in her presentation this morning, anticipated a little bit the difficulty in defining or the difficulty in identifying a generally accepted BIM definition. You would have a UK BIM definition, a EU BIM definition, and after the publication of the new ISO series, it's becoming more and more obvious that when we are talking about BIM, we're actually talking about a process. BIM is a process. So this stands as proof to the fact that when you work in a BIM process, you really need to establish contractually what you refer to when you are saying BIM, because it can mean a lot to different people. Even people do not agree when they say BIM level 2, BIM level 3, BIM level 4. So this really needs to be contractually clarified, otherwise you might get in trouble. Georgiana also anticipated the public policies at an EU level, the fact that they are inconsistent, the fact that there are mature BIM markets, immature BIM markets. It happens a little bit also with public procurement in general, no? Northern Europe usually has much more mature public procurement markets where they use a lot of centralized procurement, a lot of central purchasing bodies, so things happen in a much more professionalized way. This is not a happy situation. The fact that throughout Europe, regulations, public policies, and the level of implementation of BIM is not coherent, it's actually a deterrent to the implementation of BIM. But as I said in my introduction, it's also a proof to the fact that there are different ways to do it. I know that Eugen mentioned that in Romania the solution would be a bottom-up approach, meaning an initiative from the private companies. We're used to doing that in Romania. A lot of things that have moved forward thanks to the initiative of the industry and of the private companies. That is because the central administration in Romania has a lot of inertia, and we know that. That's not something new, or that doesn't come as a surprise. Unfortunately, in this case, I really do not believe that this is the solution. I believe that a mandated solution is the one that would best suit, because the construction industry is already fragmented, and 95% of the construction industry is made out of SMEs. This means that a coherent change of scenery led by the private initiative or led by the industry is complicated to completely change the world that we are living in. So I really believe that the solution is a mandate from the legislator in the end. I was anticipating this, the fact that we tend to believe that the public procurement legislation does not allow us to use BIM. In fact, we tend to believe that the public procurement legislation doesn't allow us to do a lot of innovative things. I remind you that the new 2014, not so new anymore, directives, what they've done actually is they've brought a lot of flexibilization to the system. I also remind you that there are a lot of procedures other than the open procedure and restricted procedure, such as competitive dialogue, such as, I don't know, negotiation. There are very complicated procurement procedure, and if a public client is educated and professionalized enough, the public procurement system can be a flexible system. It's just a matter of how we apply it. To stand as proof to what I say is Article 22, paragraph 4 under the directive, which specifically allows the use of technologies such as building information modeling in public tenders. So there you go, as long as it is not discriminatory. Nowadays, BIM is not such a novelty anymore, so it's not discriminatory if you, in a public tender documentation, you mandate the use of BIM. Going further, if my mouse works. Whoop, can somebody, okay. At an EU level, one of the initiatives so far, which is a very soft initiative, is the EU Bim Task Group. They're doing a bunch of things that are also relevant in terms of standardization, for example. You can see them on their website. As far as regulation or policy or guidance, if you want, because when we're talking about soft law, we're talking about guidance, we're not talking about legislation. They did publish a handbook which contains the common principles for public procurers and policymakers to consider when introducing BIM to their public works or strategies. Check it out. It's on the EU BIM Task Group website. It's quite vague and quite general, but I think it has a bunch of good things, and some of these good things include a description of how various member states have implemented BIM mandates and BIM public policies in their countries, and it's interesting to see that there are various ways to do it. Okay, I am really having a problem with the mouse. Okay, there you go. It works now. So I said at the beginning that I believe that the solution in countries such as Romania, Spain, Italy, Italy and Spain have mandated the use of BIM in public projects that go above a certain value. And I think it's on thresholds, 2020 is 5 million, 2025 is 1 million, something like that. So they're trying to accommodate the mandate a little bit. I believe this is the way forward for Romania as well. And I also believe, as a public procurement specialist, that the public procurers are the group with which you need to start when you want to change an industry such as the construction industry. As I said, the 2014 directives in the procurement sector brought a lot of changes. One of them was flexibilizing the system. Another was the fact that it allows procurers to introduce a lot of considerations that are beyond price when they publish a tender documentation. Social considerations, life cycle cost, but that's an economic consideration. Inclusion consideration, etc., etc. Environmental consideration. So I believe that using public procurement for something that in theory it's already being used and it's already proven useful is a good idea. Furthermore, public procurers, because they spend so much money on construction and they spend it in a more block kind of way, they can influence the behavior of the market, they can influence the behavior of the industry, which is called nudging. So, this very fashionable term which says a lot and nothing at the same time. It's also an opportunity for better resource planning, particularly when we're talking about the protection of cultural heritage. We've talked a lot today about what BIM can do, what digitalization in general can do for the protection of our cultural heritage. Well, that's a public client normally administering that particular historical monument. So there you go, you need the public client to do that. And as I said, the construction industry is highly fragmented, with 95% of the industry being SMEs. So you really can't expect that a coherent change can come from the industry. It did happen in Estonia, but Estonia is a smaller country and probably the industry is less fragmented. Okay, so moving forward, if I can with the mouse, I need to change the system. There we go. We reached the point where I speak about the actual legal issues before signing the contract, and of course this has to do with public procurement legislation. Often public clients ask themselves, how do I introduce BIM in the tender documents? How do I do that? Well, there are a lot of ways you can do that. One way is to put them in the tender specifications, really. One example is in Italy with a public works contract regarding the demolition and reconstruction of a school. It was a small project, 12 million euro. And the typical open procedure, so it wasn't a very sophisticated procurement procedure, but they did put it in the evaluation criteria, mentioning that they will use the following weighting system. They would weight 0% for traditional methods, 90% for the use of BIM throughout the project development, and 100% for the use of BIM throughout the entire life cycle. So this was an evaluation criteria that was not contested, it wasn't considered discriminatory, and it was actually a rather intelligent way to nudge the use of BIM. Another way to do it would be to put it in the actual definition of the contract. For example, Italy again, a contract having as object the design and building using the system, the BIM system of a museum on Ludovico Ariosto, apparently 1600 poet or something like that we've never heard of. And of course, another way, because we've seen evaluation criteria, we've seen the actual object of the contract, and another way is, the award criteria, because according to Article 67 under the directive, it is mandatory for public clients to use the award criteria of most economically advantageous tender, which is MEET, as we call it in public procurement parlance or language. So MEET includes the assessment of best price quality ratio, which shall be assessed on the basis of criteria including qualitative, environmental and social aspects linked to the subject matter of the contract in question. So there you go, 3 hypotheses perfectly valid and coherent and compatible with the public procurement legislation that you can use as a public client in your tender documentation. because we have doubts about whether this is discriminatory or not, and Zoya was mentioning this earlier, that public clients tend to believe that putting BIM in the evaluation criteria, on the award criteria, would make it discriminatory. We already have a couple of authorities issuing decisions on that. For example, the Basque authority in Spain, which already ruled that since the entry into force of the procurement directive, there was sufficient time for all actors on the market to adapt to the new technology, that the condition to use BIM technology is in the public interest, and that the BIM technology is already considered a generally used technology. So it's not discriminatory anymore. You have the link there if you want to check it out in Spanish, the decision. In any case, for all of you practitioners, if there are lawyers watching and so on and so forth, I believe this is a very interesting case where we can actually rely on comparative law. Stefan, are you trying to tell me that the Mr. Secretary of State is... where we can actually rely on comparative law, because the situations are, the factual situations are more than comparable. So if somebody claims that a tender documentation using BIM would be discriminatory, we can bring this decision before the national judge. The even more complicated part when we talk about BIM and the legal concerns is actually after you sign the contract. Because BIM clauses should tackle a lot of aspects that are not at all unimportant, aspects such as risk sharing, design responsibility, IP licenses. So a lot of main concerns. The first one, as I said, is having clarity on what the contracts party mean when they say we want to use BIM or we're going to use BIM. The second aspect that we need to pay attention to is the fact that there might be misunderstandings regarding roles, responsibilities, and deliverables. The definition of the level, as I said, what does BIM level 3 mean? What does BIM level 4 mean? Also, parties need to agree on a specific risk allocation. This is not something to joke about, so you need to clarify it, and you need to adapt your contract if you are going through a BIM process. Also, the very big dilemma, should BIM be included in the standard contract forms, or can I just attach protocol to it? What kind of protocol should I attach? Is it sufficient for me to attach a bilateral protocol when I have a BIM process which is supposed to be collaborative amongst a lot of other members than the two parties of a contract? So very complicated and very important aspects indeed. And last but not least, insurance aspects and intellectual property rights, because of course there might be fears that it is not clear who owns and should own the intellectual rights when you are working collaboratively in a BIM model, with a BIM model and in a BIM process. The really big problem with legal BIM is that we don't have a lot of case law. You know, lawyers work with case law. This is what gives certainty to a controversial factual situation in addition to the law, particularly those in the Anglo-Saxon world. There is, however, a first reported UK BIM dispute. Again, fascinating, because you can use it in whatever country you actually work in a BIM collaborative process. The English Technology and Construction Court, it was brought before this court. In the UK, they have a specialized construction court, so everything is highly specialized and highly qualitative when it comes to judicial rulings. Trant Engineering was engaged by the Ministry of Defence for a £72 million Mid-Atlantic power project. Mott MacDonald was the design consultant and the BIM coordinator. Mott MacDonald got upset because they didn't receive their payment, and they suspended the services and withdrew Trant's access to the platform. So the issue, the dispute, regarded a little bit whether Mott MacDonald behaved legally in suspending Trant's access or not. So you see there can be immense blockages when we're talking about IP rights or access rights, so you need to clarify that in the contract. And last but not least, when it comes to legal issues after signing the contract or when signing the contract, We need to talk a little bit about standard forms. In Romania, we do use a standard form when it comes to big contracts. It's the national standard form adopted through a governmental regulation. So we can call it a nationally mandatory standard form if you want. It doesn't have any mentions on BIM, so what you should do is, well, first of all, ask legal advice from our law firm, but second of all, pay attention that you need to do something about it if you work in BIM. There are, however, standard forms used in the Anglo-Saxon world, for instance, that have adapted to the BIM reality, like JCT or PPC 2000 Appendix 19. You can check them out of curiosity if you want to see how it looks like when you have to adapt your contract. FIDIC, they issued a couple of advisory notes to BIM users, although they didn't bring a lot of clarity, because they mentioned a list of clauses that should be changed when you're going through a BIM process. There are 29, I think, yeah, 29 sub-clauses. However, they did not mention how you should adapt those clauses to a BIM process. So that's really problematic, and you should pay attention to that. And of course, there is also the BIM protocol and the BIM execution plan. We're getting close to the end of the presentation. I said that I will mention a little bit ISO 19650 because in my opinion at King's, it really brought a shift of paradigm, and it really puts collaboration at the heart of a BIM process, and we see that from a bunch of provisions that I'm going to refer to. Now, the new ISO series show that BIM can enable dramatic improvement in the delivery and performance efficiencies, but BIM can only support these dependencies if the team members agree to share design, cost, and time data, not only in a digital form, but also in a sufficient level of detail. So that is really, really collaborative stuff, and you need a collaborative contractual instrument to do that. It really hits us that the new ISO series have brought a shift of paradigm from the very beginning, from its introduction, because it says collaboration between the participants involved in the construction projects and in asset management is pivotal to the efficient delivery and operation of assets. In other words, we really cannot take advantage of the entire BIM potential if we don't build and operate by using a collaborative process. Yes, we can design it beautifully, but it just stays there, okay? And the importance of collaboration under the ISO series might prove legally challenging, since this entails the use of contractual tools, but not only contractual tools, also procurement routes. Now, there is where the aspect becomes really, really complicated, because that entails a procurement strategy for collaboration, and that would entail, well, pre-construction activities, let's say, in an Anglo-Saxon world. In a Romanian world, Spanish world, Italian world, that would at least entail a very thorough market, not necessarily engagement, but market study. The directives allows public clients to engage with the industry during the market study before launching a tender documentation. That is not a wooden procedure. That is not a pointless provision under the directives. That is actually really important, and it's one of the most important parts of a public client's jobs. They need to know what they need, how they need it, and who can offer that to them and at what price. You need to know the market when you buy whatever. Okay. I said that I will specify in more detail why collaboration is at the heart of the new ISO series. Well, I have here a list of ISO clauses that couldn't make it clearer. The new ISO series require effective information delivery planning using a shared timetable integrating all relevant deadlines and interfaces for BIM contributions, reviews and approvals. There you go. That can only be done contractually with the proper contractual clause and instrument. It also entails an integrated risk register. You need to collaborate to have that drafted. Effective information management through direct mutual commitments to communication, clash detection, and confidentiality. An integrated multi-party information delivery cycle, a set of direct mutual BIM intellectual property licenses, a complete responsibility matrix, multi-party information container-based collaborative working, an integrated BIM federation strategy. Now tell me how you do that without the proper contract. It's pretty difficult. This is something that it's actually taken from the ISO. It's a diagram that shows the network structure relationship required by ISO 19650. That's the terminology used by the ISO. It's a terminology that makes everything difficult because it's changed. We have lead appointing party, lead appointed party, lead appointing party, and so on and so forth. A is the appointing party, so it's the client, if you see it there. B is the lead appointed party as per ISO, and C is the appointed party. And if you look at them in the circle 1, they're part of a project. They can be part of a project team, of a delivery team, or of a task team. So everything happens collaboratively if it happens in accordance with the new ISO series. And I kept on saying that to do that effectively, you need a collaborative contract. That is a rather unusual term for non-lawyers, but even for lawyers it is an unusual term, especially for construction lawyers, because the construction sector is such an antagonistic sector, and we're used to actually making our money out of claims and disputes, you know, because this is what people do, and they build very complex structures, they fight. But well, starting 1990, a bunch of studies, a bunch of industry studies, as well as, for example, some reports drafted by the UK government, have started to acknowledge that if we do want to change the industry sector, then we need to start working collaboratively, and this is the only way forward. And this is the only way to change the fact that the construction industry is the less digitalized industry out of them all. So fortunately, there is a lot of literature on what collaborative contracts are. Unfortunately, we have where to learn from. It's complex, but there you go, you need a lawyer, because collaborative contracts are defined differently. So just like you don't have a generally accepted definition for BIM, you don't have a generally accepted definition for a collaborative construction contract. Still, it is generally agreed that a collaborative contract should have the features expressed in a very influential report called Sir Latham Report, a 1990 report, which is a UK government report that is used throughout the world, and that I highly recommend as an interesting reading for whomever works in the construction sector, whether he's a lawyer or not. So what are the main features of these collaborative contracts? Well, a specific duty for all parties to deal fairly with each other and with their subcontractors, specialists and suppliers in an atmosphere of mutual cooperation. Clearly defined work stages, including milestones and other forms of activity schedule. Integration of the work of designers and specialists. A specific and formal partnering agreement that is not limited to a particular project, so a strategy basically, a collaborative strategy. And partnering arrangements that include mutually agreed and measurable targets for productivity improvements. Now, if we want to go further into the study of collaborative contracts, we can say that there are various types of collaborative contracts. One of them are partnering contracts, alliancing contracts, enterprise contracts. They're basically forms of long-term partnering on a project where the client, the main contractor, the supply chain, the consultants, the subcontractors, well, they come together and they collaborate towards obtaining mutual benefits. Then within the concept of collaborative contracts, you also have a framework agreement, which is basically a long-term type of partnering. The interesting part is that the procurement directives actually regulate under Article 32 this species of contract, which is called a framework agreement. And framework agreements are very much used by the UK public buyers to engage collaboratively with the contractors and the supply chain. And it's perfectly compatible and coherent with the public procurement legislation. So this is something that we could do here as well. We could start using framework agreements more intelligently. Unfortunately, public purchasers in Romania only use framework agreements when they want to buy long-term a lot of gas for all their cars, or a lot of paper for all their printers. That's not the way to do it. This is a complex contract that can be used for smart purchasing and long-term partnership. So it's a pity that we're not aware of what a framework agreement can do. Now we got to the part where I speak a little bit about protocols. After the publication of the new ISO series, these three institutions, BSI, the Centre for Digital Build Britain, and the UK BIM Alliance, they've published a bilateral information protocol that should be attached to the contract, and is bilateral, as I said. And, well, we are actually wondering whether this is ISO compliant or not, because as you saw in that drawing, the new ISO series require a network of relationships where the lead appointing party, the lead appointed party, and the appointed parties, they all work together with the supply chain. So can a bilateral information protocol really do the trick? In a completely integrated project, can a bilateral protocol solve all the mutual IP licenses, for instance, that you need to obtain? And we really think that it cannot, it doesn't, and that a modern BIM protocol should integrate contributions of all team members to design cost, time, safety, construction and operation, should capture lessons learned on successive projects. Most importantly, especially when we're talking about public procurement, one of the main issues in Romania, and not only, is that public buyers do not capture lessons learned. We need to learn the lesson over and over and over again every time that we start a new project. It actually seems that we are in a limbo, particularly with the highways and with the infrastructure. We don't seem to capture lesson learned, and it's a pity, because BIM and collaborative working can help with that. And a modern multi-party protocol should also enable sharing of the right information at the right time and combine efficient collaborative working with clear legal rights and obligations. So as I said, unlike traditional BIM protocols, a multi-party collaborative BIM protocol can combine BIM with early contractor involvement, collaborative working, strategic thinking. And at King's, we are currently drafting this collaborative BIM protocol, and it's based on the previously published FAC1 standard contract. FAC1 standard contract is a contract just like JCT or PPC or FIDIC, because we use a lot of FIDIC here, that was published in 2016. Used already in a lot of jurisdictions. It was drafted by King's College. It can be used as a framework agreement, as I said, as per Article 32 under the directive, but also as a contract integrator in a project that entails multiple contracts. And actually in big projects, all big projects entail multiple contracts, because it's not only the main contractor, but subcontracts and designers and consultants and so on and so forth. I have an image here with how FAC1 operates. You can see here that there's the client there, plus various alliance members, which can be the parties that I've just mentioned, consultants, subcontractors, tier 1 supply chain members, if you want. There's also an alliance manager, which is the person in charge of driving the collaborative process throughout the implementation of the contract. And you can also involve stakeholders and the supply chain, which is really important. So the collaborative BIM protocol created currently by King's is based on FAC1. And as I said, FAC1 is already being implemented in a lot of countries, in Russia, in Brazil, in Italy, and in the UK and throughout the world. it took up procurement worth over 45 billion pounds in 4 years. So it's a good contract, and we're really sure that it's going to be a good protocol. And this is us. This is our law firm. We can help you with the BIM protocol. We can help you with your public procurement issues. We can help you with your construction issues. Probably if you're working in Romania, you don't really have a lot of BIM disputes. But whatever kind of doubts you have, just pay attention that you need to align your contract to your building process. This means that if you intend to use BIM, you need to clarify it in your contracts, and you need the proper legal advice when you do that. Thank you.